This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. This show is also brought to you by our patrons. If you want to support the show in a different way, with just $1 a month, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. You can get a sticker. You can get access to an exclusive show that we do every month that's wild and chaotic and fun and something you can only get by becoming a member of the Patreon. There'll be so many more perks very, very soon. But for now, do you want a sticker? Do you want a sticker that has a Now This Is Lit logo? Because it's fantastic and I love them. But I also want to give them away because there's just a stack of stickers on my desk. So if you want one, $1 a month, patreon.com/StarWarsLitPod. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And I have two guests on the show this week who are going to talk with me about something I think is very important. And we address two questions, two ideas in this recording, which are, why does Star Wars on the screen often do things differently than the books do when the two overlap in storytelling? And does that mean that therefore Star Wars books don't matter? I have Alden from Ahch-To Radio and Davor, my producer, with me for this conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed recording it. I figured we could start by kind of going through, because I don't think I remember all of them, and you might remember ones that I don't. All of the instances where a Star Wars something on screen has taken something that happened in a book, and the thing that happens in the show is not the same as the thing that happened in the book, which a lot of people don't love when that happens. And in some cases, I understand, and we'll talk about that, and we'll get into why we're talking about that now, kind of relevant to other things that are going on. It'll be a little bit of a different kind of episode, but you know what? We need that sometimes. So we can kind of like go back and forth or like list. I don't have a list of all the times this has happened, but the first one that always comes to mind for me, even though it's the one that I think bothers me the least, is the Bad Batch premiere taking part of the Kanan comic, and Order 66 in the comic, from what I remember, happens a little bit differently than in the show, but it's really not that different.
Yeah,
the
it's
whole
mostly
like
aesthetics.
Yeah, it looks a little different, I think, but it's pretty much the same. The idea is the same, which is the case with a lot of these. What other ones have we got?
Well, the Kanan comic was one, like you said, but then you start to get into ones where it's like it might be several small changes versus a big one, or in the case of the Ahsoka novel, both, which is a unique and social case as well. Like that one started, the tip of that iceberg was her lightsabers post Order 66 should be her Clone Wars, original Clone Wars sabers, and then Clone Wars season 7 comes around and is like, no, they're blue during the siege and after. So that was one. The specifics or lack thereof of Cobb Vanth's origin story are altered. They're altered, like some of these will be, in as much as it happened if you wanted it to have happened. There's nothing that says it didn't. You know, it's more of a televised version. There's a complicated conversation to be had overall about this, and plays a lot into my feelings on why I think a lot of it is overblown. Tartakovsky Clone Wars pre-Disney was already being reshaped and or layered differently, or things were being built around them in 3D Clone Wars. This has always been the thing, which we'll talk about. Gosh, Davor, there's got to be more recent ones.
There's more.
Yeah. There's I mean, we'll probably talk about this one in more detail because like there's a couple layers of the reaction, the response to it, but there is the other Ahsoka novel change, which is the Tales of the Jedi episode.
Yeah, that's the big one for sure.
Yeah, that's the big one, and we'll go into all the layers of that one.
Yeah.
But there's the two Ahsoka ones, and like pretty much everything around the Siege of Mandalore, even like the fight with like how Maul is captured and all of that is different. You mentioned Cobb.
There's the not change, but there was a little bit of a kerfuffle when Black Chrysanthemum and Boba Fett didn't act like they knew each other really upon meeting, which I didn't take me out of the scene, but people really wanted a direct acknowledgement of that. There are instances that are much lighter than any of these, like Poe and Rey introducing themselves in Last Jedi on screen, even though they met in the novelization of Force Awakens. But it's like novelizations have their own rules,
right?
So there are some tiny ones along the way.
Yeah, and I think those are the big ones, and like the ones that people always mention when this whole conversation comes back around, as it tends to do, where certain people are blamed for things being different than people remember in a book, even when it's not their fault. I'll say it. Dave Filoni has very little to do with the Bad Batch, in terms of like direction, story, whatever. And he just becomes every time the person that is blamed when Order 66 for Kanan is not exactly the same as it was in the comic and things like that. I don't love that, as you can tell.
I don't love that either, and just because it's just extremely like I don't think any of the three of us want to come in here and just like try to put people in their place. It's not that, but it is extremely dismissive. It's dismissive of the people that you should be discussing. In that case, Jennifer Corbett, Brad Rao, and their team. It's dismissive of Story Group. It's dismissive of the way this all works. It's dismissive of people's lived experiences and what they thought when they were younger versus what they think now in the present. Like a recurring theme will be Dave, his show got canceled, then briefly got new life on Netflix with stuff, and then got, still didn't get to get finished. Clone Wars has had 3 endings. And in that, he gave some notes to publishing and just let it be known what he might do. Yeah. And it got done. Him then coming back around and saying, well, this is it, is not some inherently malicious act. There's a lot of my favorite creators need to be at war with your favorite creators or with the creator we deem as the top dog. And there's all one team. They're not fighting. Fans are fighting.
As they so often are for some reason. The thing that I think bothers me mostly, the thing that bothers me the most, why can't I speak, when these conversations come around, it's the whole like, oh, like Lucasfilm doesn't think that the books matter, or the books don't matter, or what's the point in reading the books because they're just gonna override them in the shows. And like it's happened, like we listed off all of these instances where it's happened. That's such a low number. It doesn't happen that often. If you think of all of the episodes of Clone Wars that have ever been, and a couple of these episodes changed a few things or things like that. It's not like this doesn't happen like every new episode of a show. So I just yeah. He's like, it's already hard enough to get people to read sometimes. So like to say like, oh, like what's the point in reading these books? Like, don't say that.
It's also to me as again trying to be nice. I was gonna say idiotic or moronic, but like even if I'm not going that far, it's just as reductive and silly. It's silly. It would to sit around and say things like I'm not gonna have your pizza, Meg, because I had divorced pizza. I know what pizza tastes like. Or I'm not gonna listen to a cover of a song because I've heard the song. It's like, okay, guess what? You read the novelization of a thing or even separate works, and why would I go here if they touched on it here? For that person's voice, for their style,
Yeah.
for their prose, for their choices and things you wouldn't get for their perspective. It's so like, it's such a content era thing to be like, I know the story beats, so I don't need to read it. It's crazy. It really is symptomatic of the 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 trivia brained. I say that ironically as somebody that does trivia online. But you can't live that. Like, you both know as well as I do that in Attack of the Clones, when Dexter Jettster is explaining the difference between knowledge and wisdom, that endures to this day as one of the great subtweets of fans.
Yes.
It truly is. It's about this conversation. The reason the three of us are here is because knowledge and wisdom have been completely mixed up.
Yeah. Yeah. And for context, because this will be coming out a while after this whole conversation happened online, which is the trailer for season 3 of The Bad Batch has seemingly, allegedly brought back Ventress, which allegedly,
you have doubts?
I mean, it could be a flashback. That's my whole thing, is like, we don't know why she's in that scene or what the context is. So how can we know exactly what is going on? I mean, it could be that she could be alive, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of. I mean that's another part of this whole conversation is a little bit of the like the jumping the gun. Now, I mean, like you watch that scene in the context of the Bad Batch trailer, and like, you know, it's fair to say that maybe the Occam's razor explanation is yes, she is alive, and this is all happening in the present. But also, it's, you know, Star Wars trailers have their tradition of baiting and switching. There is the little glimpse of Dark Rey in the Rise of Skywalker trailer. There's the "What will you become" in the Rogue One trailer, and that shot. Oh, the Rogue One trailers. Oh, the different movie that was the Rogue One trailers.
The trailer for the alternate reality. With "What will you become" and Beach Krennic and Jin in the tunnel and
the TIE fighter.
Yeah. Oh man.
But yeah, like they do this often, which is they see these things knowing that it will get a kind of reaction, but then in context, it will mean something else. Assuming that, as in the Rogue One context, you ever get the context at all, which you didn't. But like even in the, you know, the Dark Rey example in Rise of Skywalker. So again, it's not, you know, it's not a wild conclusion for people to watch and be like, oh, I guess she's back in the, you know, in the present timeline. But then there is the point, like, we don't actually know in what context we are seeing Ventress in that particular moment.
Right.
And it is possible that the show will recontextualize that.
Thank you for saying that word. So the whole reason this became a thing, at least for a minute, it didn't last very long. Spoilers for the Dark Disciple novel. Ventress does not survive through the end. It's a beautiful story, I personally think, but everyone who had read the book was like, wait a minute, like, that's not how the book ends. And then immediately jumped to, oh, here goes Dave again doing something different than what the book did. I mean, something amazing happened with that, which is the book like jumped to the charts because everyone was now wanting to read it and seeing what all this is about, which is a whole other thing that I hope we'll talk about in some context on some other episode. But you had to have the creators quoted, and then you had to have the Star Wars social media take that quote out of their own article and put it in a whole thing in an image so that everyone could see that they specifically had to say, we're not undoing this book, we're honoring it.
Meg, I hate it so much. I hate it. I hate the culture.
Which, you know what, like, I am glad they did that, but I hate that they had to do that.
Exactly. You said it perfect. That's exactly how I would have phrased it. I am fine with them putting out fires, but there shouldn't be any fires.
Yeah.
Because there shouldn't be any arsonists.
It's just like, I mean, it's so like, that's the culture. You know, someone catches on to something and then it catches fire and goes and goes and goes, because immediately the quickest and most reactionary and most retweetable conclusion is they're undoing the book no longer matters. And I don't think I think a lot of people maybe have come away from that conversation not feeling that way. I don't know. We'll see when this is all going to happen again when the episode airs. We don't even know exactly which episode it is, or maybe we do. Did we talk about that?
I don't think we know.
No, we don't know. We speculated from the titles, but it's going to happen all over again. But hopefully more people will have read the book, and we don't know how but the whole point is, despite this whole conversation that had to happen and everyone getting upset, we still don't know what the context is, but we have been assured that it's not going to retcon anything. We'll talk about that word because I hate it also. It's not, they had to say that they're honoring the book and they're not changing anything, which is fine. But why have we gotten to this point where they have to do that? Why? What is happening?
I think. Do you want me to field that question?
Go for it. Go for it.
I think that there is a spectrum of entitlement, of ownership, of insecurity that can be very harmless and unintentional, and people don't even realize it. Yeah. But it can also be very, very malicious. And we're all guilty of it to a certain degree. I mean, when we buy into the, because Star Wars is this contradiction of like this thing that is biblical in its scale across our world, but also still somehow manages to be niche. It's very weird in that way that it can exist in both realms. But by engaging with it, we all have this language that only we can speak. And you meet someone in public. I work a lot with my co-host and co-producer Ken Knapsack, and Ken talks about being a kid and meeting another kid who knew what the Y-wing was, and like how that sort of brings you together. When that happens, it's great. But when that happens and you live in it, like a lot of us do, that becomes your comfort, and it gets closer and closer to identity, which is where it gets very dangerous. And then when people hold that thing so dear from the best place, a change on that feels like a change on them and their experience. And then it becomes a battle of parsing your thoughts and solidifying memory like it's in carbonite, while also dealing with what's over here. And that's very hard for some people. I feel fortunate to, I don't know what it is about me or what I experience, but I feel fortunate in that if they remade A New Hope tomorrow, I will be so curious. I will go, of course, see it immediately. But for not a single moment do I think I would feel anger, because I love what New Hope taught me. I don't feel like my experience with it should be a law of nature. I think it really comes down to that preciousness. Like, can you say my experience is mine and I don't need it to be repeatedly validated? That's why I respect Legends fans. Like, they got this en masse for 20 years of fandom, blinked away, mostly. And they handled it mostly well.
The thing I've noticed about like fans of Star Wars books and this sense of community that kind of surrounds this one form of media is, if you love the books, you really, really love them. And that makes people feel very protective of them. And the thing is, we're never going to get like a straight book to show, book to movie adaptation in Star Wars. It just does not work like that. But when there are opportunities for creators to kind of like take a story that might overlap with part of a book or a character from a book, and they have the chance to kind of take that onto the screen in a way, a piece of it or a piece of their story, I think that's really cool. But it's become like, I get nervous about it now because I know how people are going to react. And I'm like, oh, you're not going to like, if anything, like going into Tales of the Jedi, I knew that like, if anything anything from the Ahsoka episodes was from the novel and it was different, there were going to be a lot of people that were upset. And that is actually the one case in all of these where like I also am kind of upset by it for certain reasons, because I think there were changes made that like I don't know why certain characters had to be changed. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, that's
And
the
I
one where like
understand.
real life starts to bleed into it, where
Yeah.
we're talking about is no longer Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like that's valid. Those feelings of like, I felt seen by this character and you kind of took them out of the story like that. I have problems with that and I understand where people are coming from with that, but that's not the case with most of these. And I think it's interesting when these two forms of media overlap, and because it's all Star Wars storytelling, it's all taking place in the same universe, in some cases around the same time, and I love it. But it's to the point where um people who love the books also generally love Star Wars, and they want to see the things that they love on the screen, and when it's not exactly the same, they get very upset, and I understand that, but it goes too far. It just goes too far, and I can't with it. And when this happened with Dark Disciple, it was kind of like, well, like because we don't know how this is going to go, I think you should get the book, pick up the book if you've read it already, reread it, enjoy it. I reread it so that I could get ready for whatever reason she's in this episode, because we still don't know, and like just enjoy the ride. And I wish more people could just enjoy the ride, because I don't know, I'm here to just have fun, because Star Wars for me a lot of times is an escape, and like when I'm not analyzing things or making connections to the real world, I just want to have fun. And there are people who can't do that, and that's fine, but it's too much sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that because we're so plugged in, I don't know if
Yeah.
you noticed, we're doing a Star Wars podcast. There's a certain level of a certain level of commitment to the stories of Star Wars if you're going to be doing this. But with that comes sort of a double-edged sword of where you absorb that same level of commitment from other people,
Yeah.
and their commitment sometimes is based in more personal wants than it is like, let's engage with what they made. It's what are the parts of it that are mine, and
Yeah.
that's really difficult sometimes, and it's something that I think clashes. And the reason this is why it gets so spicy with Star Wars in particular is because it happens to be the one franchise that is so based on things that are not rigid, these things that
Yeah.
are loose. And like, I mean, let's start at the top with the Bible, which has, these different iterations of the same events throughout. You look
Mhm.
at Arthurian myth, one of its other key inspirations. You've got stories where King Arthur's there, but he's not the guy. Look at the Green Knight is one of them,
Yeah.
and there's different versions of that. There's the Disney version of the Sword and Stone versus the actual text. So all of that stuff is malleable, and people seem okay with it being reinterpreted and reinterpreted. They even already engage in this way in comics. They just don't talk about it in these terms.
Mhm.
But everyone's version of every iconic character looks different. What hairstyle did she actually have at that time? I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's
Yeah.
flavor. And that line is difficult for people to define for themselves.
Yeah. And I think like the other thing um is like when you're looking at, we'll use Ahsoka as the example. When you're looking at E.K. Johnston's book, which she wrote a while ago now, way before season 7 of Clone Wars came out, way before Tales of the Jedi. And that book is not changing. She wrote it, it is hers. She told a story of Ahsoka, and that's the story that we have. And the thing with like getting Star Wars stories in different formats, like you have the book, but then you have Clone Wars, you have the TV show, you have Dave Filoni doing whatever he's doing. And that is like, that's his version of the story. It might be the same story or similar things happen, because a lot of what's different between the Clone Wars and the Ahsoka novel is in flashback, so it's not even the whole thing. But like the story that he's telling. And it's not the same as the story that's already been told. And like, that's how stories work, is you tell a story to someone and then they tell the same story to someone else, but it's not the exact same story. It just goes and goes and goes and changes a little bit every time someone tells the story, because that we just add things, or we interpret things differently, or we remember different things. That's how I like to look at it. And a lot of people don't look at it like that, because Star Wars is Star Wars and it all has to be connected, it all has to be the same, but it doesn't, and it's not. And that doesn't mean that books are like a tier lower than TV. It doesn't mean that they don't matter. It doesn't mean that they're not important. It's just a different way of telling a story. And that's so hard to like, people don't think about it that way, because if it's all Star Wars and things are different from here to here to here, regardless of whether or not it's a book or a show or a movie, it all kind of gets lumped together. But I don't look at it that way, and I don't really know why.
I think a lot of that, what you're talking about in terms of people reacting to like Star Wars as Star Wars and kind of thinking of it as one thing, I think it does also kind of come back to something that I think we have not yet anyone used this word or some version of this word, which is about canon and canonicity.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's, you know, a lot of this goes back to sort of one of the original promises of the Disney acquisition, which is this idea of like, we're going to actually try to ensure that there is this kind of cohesive story, and we're going to try to put a mechanism into place that says like, okay, this is the official chronology of things that happen. And I mean, increasingly as I get into my crotchety 30s, I start thinking maybe that was a mistake. Maybe that should not have been done, but maybe that's another conversation, or it's a related conversation. But I think it does sort of come to that, like people have a certain, there is now a kind of built-in investment in terms of this, like in terms of the canon and stories aligning across these different media. And you know, I think some, you know, sometimes these questions about like canon and canonicity like can be valuable, like if you're coming in from the standpoint of like you want to know what's the official story or whatever, like, or how something relates to one another. But I think it does sometimes become complicated when it becomes this sort of proxy for like, is this important, does this matter, should I care? And I think like maybe like going looser with it in some ways, being more flexible with it, I think is like, I think the project that has most recently illustrated the value in that is something like Star Wars Visions. Because Star Wars Visions is interesting. It's like, it's officially not canon, but it could be. There's nothing in any of the stories that directly the Elder could be a High Republic story. That could have happened somewhere.
Absolutely.
You know,
and the Village Bride fits pretty comfortably into any era. Like, doesn't matter that there's B1 battle droids there, because we've seen them across time now. So it speaks to, again, like you said, like people interpreting that word as, well, should I care about this? And it's like, that to me is where it's like, it becomes bigger than any of these properties. It similar. It even happens over at Marvel. We both know that. Like, is this connected to the overall MCU, or is this just like that happens all the time? Oh, do I care about What If, or Daredevil seasons 1 and 3 leading into this, or it's all over. Like it's like transactional. And to those people, I would say have an honest conversation with yourself and ask why you need that stamp to make things matter. It should matter to you because you felt something while experiencing it. You felt good in any way, or moved in any way, even if it made you sad or angry. That's what matters more than canon. And I like the idea of it. I always say it's not a law, it's a framework. It's a guy. It's the Barbosa line. You know, the code be more guidelines. Like, that's like, there is a level of things that stick, but they're all a little bit malleable. This character was here and this happened. Those things are canon. I always go to Pablo Hidalgo's example. talking about Han and Greedo and who shot first, the thing we're all tired of hearing about. The version that is canon is Han and Greedo both walked into Chalmun's cantina that day. Han lived, Greedo died. Reports vary. That's canon. What you seeing it in 77 versus you seeing it in 97, that doesn't mean that the plot was changed or the story was changed or even in the arcs were changed. It's just this detail that you didn't know, which speaks to your hatred of the word retcon, which I also can't stand. A retcon is going back and saying, by the way, Luke is actually a Joey Skywalker. That's it. That's a retcon. Going back and telling me and then releasing dubbed versions where they call him Joey. That's a retcon. New information is different. And when they go and they retell Superman's origin in comic books, they're retconning Superman's origin. That is a proper use of it. Here's the version we're going with now. When Batman Year One came out, it was pretty much generally accepted after that we would all be assuming Year One was Year One. A retcon is not, hey, the Bad Batch met Caleb Doom. That's not a retcon. That's just something you didn't know yet.
Yep. Yes. I have the word retcon muted on Twitter, and I have for like 2 years, and I forgot. For you. I forgot about that until this whole Dark Disciple conversation started happening. I was like, well, I'm not really seeing a lot of it. I was like, oh, it's because I have this word muted. It's great.
You're like, it's funny. I don't see Star Wars tweets either. I think I have that muted. I have discourse muted. I don't see discourse about discourse.
I wish.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is like to get to the conversation you're trying to have about retcon and the notion is that like I think it is, it's a limiting concept, which is like it's like sure you can label something, but it's the least interesting take to have on something. And to think of more like a sort of, in the spirit of what Alden was talking about, like to think about it as like a recontextualization. So like if like let's take like the most, maybe the biggest example in Star Wars, which is about Luke's paternity. You go to A New Hope and you get the Obi-Wan, he betrayed and murdered your father. Okay, well, it's clear in that case that New Hope, at that when George was making in 76, 77, Vader was over here, Anakin was over there, A killed B. They were two separate people. Then at some point in Empire, he's like, nah, they're one person. And so then you're like, okay, well then he says this thing. And then of course, you get the kind of the reconciliation of that in Return of the Jedi of like, from a certain point of view, and the good man who as your father was gone. So like you can take the surface level view and like you can say, okay, well, George retconned A New Hope. I'm like, sure, you can say that. Sure. And in a very technical sense, you'd be correct. But you'd also have the least interesting perspective on it, because now that you have this new piece of information, like, okay, like what does he betrayed and murdered your father mean? And now when you think about like the whole arc of Anakin's story, and then also by extension Vader's story, as being one that's defined by these two identities that are in one person, and he's constantly struggling with the push and pull of he wants to be Vader, but Anakin is still in there, and all that whole struggle that you get, whether it's in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, whether it pops up a little bit in Rebels, whether it's in the comics, like all of that storytelling, all of it comes from the root of that is he betrayed and murdered your father. It's that line that gets recontextualized.
Yeah.
Right. And that comes down to George and Lawrence Kasdan and Gary Kurtz and all of their thinking, all their psychological approach to it, because they could have easily just released, and I think maybe people back in the 60s and 70s and even early 80s would have done this. They would have just been like, this idea is better. And they just run with it in the next movie. And they don't even think to make it poetic. They don't even think to make it a reveal. They just, it's just like this now. There are great franchises that have done this. Like the Bond iterations are only as connected as they feel like being.
Yeah.
There are things that happen in things like the Mission Impossible movies where it didn't really feel like 1 or 2 counted until 7 part 1,
Yeah.
which is now just 7 anyway. So it's like there's that version, but instead, and that would have been retcon if people in 1980 were like, oh, I thought he had a dad that was okay, all right, that's retcon. But instead they thought, or is it just something we didn't tell the audience yet?
Mm-hmm.
And that's special. That's when you can get emotional juice out of it and really say, oh no, we meant it. Because now kids that watch New Hope and then watch Empire, it's just a great film reveal for them. It's just a twist. It's just one of the greatest twists in storytelling. And and sometimes it's less elegant, like how Empire obviously has a love triangle going on. Like, that's a little bit harder to poetry your way out of, George.
Have either of you read Splinter of the Mind's Eye?
No.
I'd never have.
It is the second book technically to come out. It came out after the novelization. A New Hope had come out, but Empire wasn't out yet. And it's very hard to read knowing that Luke and Leia are siblings, because the vibe in this entire book is, oh, maybe we like each other. And it is,
Lord.
because he didn't know any different when he was writing it. And so it's like, oh no, it's rough. But that's a very good example of like, it's so fun now to go back to these things where we didn't know that information before, but now we do. And maybe that book doesn't land as well as it did when it first came out, but with that new information that we have,
maybe.
Unless you're, into certain things.
Your last name is Lannister.
No, I don't know. I like it. I like that in Star Wars, we keep telling new stories that build off of old stories, that give us new information about old stories that we didn't have before. And it builds and it builds and it builds. And it makes it even more entertaining to go back and watch or read or listen to things that you've already consumed, knowing what you know now. I still haven't done it. I still haven't watched A New Hope after watching the Kenobi series, but I really want to, because now you're going to look at it a little different now that you've seen the series, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I get so much joy out of that, because even though I've seen this movie a million times, I didn't know that thing that we now know. And it's gonna be different. And I like that. And it's okay if other people don't. But I find much entertainment in that practice of learning new things.
It makes things better. It just makes things so much richer. I mean, I even find Yoda to be more compelling in everything he's in because of High Republic.
Yeah. See,
I know about not his formative years. He's still old as hell, but it's it's like it's working years, more active management style.
Yeah.
And you mentioned New Hope. I mean, even down to the sequels, we always knew that Leia and Han named their son after Obi-Wan. That was obvious to us, unless you thought he was named after Ben Guadagneros, which I guess, sure. I'm sure Han was a fan. But after the Kenobi series, I understand what Obi-Wan Kenobi means to her. Not just he brought the trio together, which he did. That's something huge. But I understand that since she was a little 10-year-old girl, Obi-Wan Kenobi was central to her life and her heroism. So, and I get that because of what some people would just be like, it's a retcon. It's a retcon that they met. Why are you denying yourself the joy?
Because Star Wars isn't for joy, it's for getting likes and clicks, and retcon is such a clickable word.
By the way, subscribe and leave a review for this podcast.
We should come up with the most clickbait heavy title for this episode that we possibly can, and I want to see if it would make any difference.
We are retconning the word retcon. That's the title.
There you go.
Oh my god. Wow.
Canon is dead again.
I feel like I've been in therapy for the past hour. I feel like I feel rejuvenated. I feel like I've finally gotten to talk about something that has honestly just bothered me for so long. And this is not like, people, I mean, if you have an opinion, if you have a concern, if you have a thought, like, you're entitled to that. And I'm not like saying people aren't allowed to have concerns, because again, back to Dark Disciple, we don't know what this Bad Batch episode is going to be, why Ventress is there, what the context is. If you're concerned, you're allowed to be concerned. I'm not like knocking anybody here, but it is just this same thing. It's a pattern. It happens every single time. It will happen again when the episode airs, when Ventress is back, when we all see that, even after we have that context. We're, us having this conversation doesn't change anything, but it's good to like be able to talk about like why some of these small changes don't matter. Why a lightsaber color maybe isn't worth a like 10 tweet thread on why Dave Filoni is worse. I don't know.
He hurt me personally when he changed those lightsaber colors.
I mean, I don't know.
I will say, Dave, why blue, man? Really? Blue? No, I get it. See, and that's the thing, is
good.
I am not a blue lightsaber person. I'm not. But then I had a conversation back when season 7 of Clone Wars came out with a friend, and we discussed what that meant for Anakin's control issues and his refusal to accept change. That he would slap his own lightsaber color on their friendship, quite literally. And that's so rich for where he is in his life at that moment. And it happened because somebody said, well, what if we did it a little bit like this? Which most things have the freedom to do. That happens in comic books all the time. That happens in mythology. There's that quote that's been going around of J.J. Abrams talking to Daisy Ridley about the massive expectations of this franchise. And then it was irresponsibly posted with a separate quote about her anxiety going into Last Jedi. And then everybody decided to crucify Abrams again. But it reminded me of this quote from Joseph Campbell's The Power of Myth. And of course, Campbell presented in a historical context. You look back and there's some not great stuff. But in terms of the connection to George, I'm going to share this quote. I prepared one thing for this podcast. Wow. Here it comes. That's the reduction of mythology to theology. Mythology is very fluid. Most of the myths are self-contradictory. You may even find 4 or 5 myths in a given culture, all giving different versions of the same mystery. Then theology comes along and says it has got to be just this way. Mythology is poetry, and the poetic language is very flexible. Religion turns poetry into prose, which is not an attack on religion at all. I don't want anyone to think that. But when you think about what Abrams said, that Star Wars is a religion for people. It's bigger than a franchise. It's a religion. Then it comes with everything that comes with. It comes with all the great stuff and the Star Wars celebrations and the crying and the cheering and the goodwill and the raising money. It comes with all of that. But it also comes with people saying, and it better be this way. Instead of look at all the ways it can be, it's look at the ways I want it to be. And that's the dangerous part.
Yeah. And I think like it's helpful for me even sometimes to remind myself that like I'm not the one who wrote the Star Wars episode. Like it was not up to me. There's a reason it's not my job, and like decisions are made, stories are told in a certain way for a reason, and we are not. Some people think they are. We are not in control of that though. And I think like the best way to experience Star Wars just overall is to just, you can break down the stories, you can analyze the stories, you can connect the stories to anything you're thinking about. We all do it. But at the end of the day, like we can't change the way that the story is. And I think it's good to just sometimes absorb the story and enjoy it for what it is.
I agree. For the
Me
record.
too.
this has been really, really great. I'm really glad that we got to have this conversation. Not just because of online fandom being the way that it is, but because there's a lot to be said about books in Star Wars and how they connect to other stories and why they matter, why they're important, and why sometimes the little things are not worth getting mad at. Thank you both for coming on to my show that really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things and talking to me about something that's really fun.
It does matter.
Thank you.
If it matters to you, it matters. That's the moral of this whole conversation.
That's honestly, if it matters to you, it matters might be a good title or tagline, because that really is it. Like, it can't be taken away from you.
Yeah.
None of this can. So thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. I'm amazed that you were able to keep this as concise as you did, and that it didn't end up with me just pulling out a list of grievances like, and that time that you all tried to tell me that the Bad Batch doesn't matter, you're wrong.
I seem to have this effect on people where like someone will come into a conversation like upset, and I just am very calm and I'm very like rational. And it just like it sets the mood. I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing.
You have and I mean this in the best of ways, a very like Spock quality. Like, you're there, you're in the action, but you're like, yeah, I'll get us out of there in under an hour, and we'll hit it here, and everyone will say their piece and feel satisfied.
And
Spock is a character from Star Trek, for anyone listening who doesn't know.
Please don't be upset with me. He's already upset. You're upset. I've never seen Star Trek.
Look, there's plenty of great places to start. That's a different podcast, but if you put on just one episode of Strange New Worlds, I promise your life will improve.
Oh, that sounds great. Despite all the technical difficulties that we had on our end, getting this started, it went so well. And I'm so glad that it did. And I hope that all of you listening enjoyed listening and are not mad at us. Everyone, I'll see you next week. Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Davor and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. You can keep up with the show on our Substack, and Now This Is Lit, and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support the show, there are many ways you can do that, many of which are in the show description. Patreon is a great and new way to do that. It's $1 a month. You can get exclusive access to a show that only members of the Patreon get. It's very fun. You can also get a sticker and hopefully many more perks to come very soon. And the link to that is also in the show description. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram and TikTok.